The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, casting long shadows across the marble floor. 12-year-old David sat quietly in one of the plush leather chairs, his school backpack resting beside him. He had been waiting for almost an hour now, occasionally glancing at his phone to check the time. His mother had told him she would be done with her meeting by 4 o'clock, and it was already past. David opened his science textbook and continued reading about the solar system. He had a test coming up next week and wanted to make sure he was prepared. The hotel lobby was peaceful, with soft classical music playing in the background and the gentle sound of a water fountain nearby. A few business people walked through, talking quietly on their phones or heading to the elevators. The boy had always been taught to be respectful and well-behaved in public places. He sat up straight, kept his voice down when he occasionally answered a text from his friends, and made sure not to leave any trash around his chair. His mother had raised him to understand that how he presented himself mattered, especially in places like this expensive hotel. Richard Whitmore, the day manager, was having a particularly stressful afternoon. 2 of his staff members had called in sick. There was a problem with the air conditioning on the 3rd floor, and he had already dealt with 3 customer complaints. As he walked through the lobby, checking on things, his eyes fell on the young boy sitting alone in the corner. Something about the situation bothered him immediately. This was an upscale hotel, and he prided himself on maintaining what he called appropriate standards. In his mind, unaccompanied children, especially ones who looked like they might not belong in such an expensive place, were a problem waiting to happen. Whitmore straightened his tie and walked over to where David was sitting. The boy looked up politely as the manager approached, closing his textbook and giving him his full attention. "Excuse me, young man," Whitmore said, his voice carrying an edge of authority. "Are you a guest in this hotel?" David nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. Well, my mom is. She's upstairs in a meeting. She told me to wait here until she's finished." Whitmore looked the boy up and down, taking in his school uniform and neat appearance, but his expression remained skeptical. "And what room are you staying in?" "We're in room 847, David replied without hesitation. "My mom said her meeting would be done by 4, but it's running a little late." The manager's frown deepened. He had been working at high-end hotels for 15 years, and he had developed what he considered a good instinct for spotting people who didn't belong. Despite the boy's polite manner and neat appearance, something about the situation felt wrong to him. "I need to see some identification or proof that you're actually a guest here," Whitmore demanded, his tone becoming more aggressive. David's eyebrows raised in surprise. "I don't have ID, sir. I'm only 12, but I can call my mom if you want." "To check with her. Anyone can make up a room number," Whitmore said dismissively. "This is a respectable establishment, and we can't have random children hanging around the lobby. It makes our paying guests uncomfortable." The boy glanced around the lobby, confused. There were only a few other people around, and none of them seemed to be paying any attention to him. He had been sitting quietly for over an hour without bothering anyone. "Sir, I really am staying here with my mom," David said, his voice still respectful but with a slight tremor of nervousness. "She's Dr. Johnson, and she's in conference room B on the mezzanine level. I can show you her business card if that helps." Whitmore's expression hardened further. The boy's continued politeness somehow made him even more suspicious. In his experience, kids who were up to no good often tried to charm their way out of trouble. "Look, son, I don't know what game you're playing, but this needs to stop right now," the manager said, raising his voice slightly. "I want you to gather your things and leave this hotel immediately." David felt his heart start beating faster. He had never been in a situation like this before. His mother had always taught him to be respectful to adults in authority, but this man was asking him to leave when he hadn't done anything wrong. "Please, sir, can I just call my mom? She can come down and explain everything. I promise I'm not causing any trouble." "I don't want to hear any more stories," Whitmore snapped. "You need to leave now or I'll have to call security." Other guests in the lobby were starting to notice the commotion. An elderly couple near the concierge desk had stopped their conversation and were watching with concern. A businessman waiting for the elevator had turned around to see what was happening. Mrs. Patterson, a regular guest who had been staying at the hotel for 3 days, approached the situation cautiously. She had been watching the young boy read his textbook for the past hour and had been impressed by how well behaved he was. "Excuse me," she said to the manager, "but I've been sitting over there, and this young man has been nothing but polite and quiet. He's been reading his schoolbook the whole time. What seems to be the problem?" Whitmore turned to her with a forced smile. "Thank you for your concern, ma'am, but this is a hotel matter. We need to maintain certain standards for the comfort and safety of all our guests." Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "But he's just a child reading a book. What standards is he violating?" The manager's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being questioned by guests, especially when he was trying to handle what he saw as a security issue. "Ma'am, I appreciate your input, but I need to ask you to let me handle this situation," he said firmly. David watched the exchange with growing anxiety. He pulled out his phone and started to dial his mother's number, but Whitmore quickly stepped forward. "Put that phone away right now," the manager ordered. "You're creating a disturbance and I want you out of this lobby immediately." "But sir, I just want to call my mom," David said, his voice cracking slightly. "She can clear this whole thing up in 2 minutes." By now, several other guests had noticed what was happening. A young couple with their laptops had stopped working and were openly staring. The hotel's front desk clerk looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene, knowing that challenging a manager could cost her job. Mr. Rodriguez, a business traveler who had been having coffee in the lobby cafe, pulled out his phone and started recording. Something about the situation struck him as very wrong, and he wanted to document what was happening. "This is your final warning," Whitmore said, his voice now loud enough that everyone in the lobby could hear. "Either you leave voluntarily, or I'm calling security to escort you out." David's hands were shaking now. He had never been treated like this before, and he didn't understand why the manager was being so hostile. He had done exactly what his mother had told him to do: sit quietly and wait for her to finish her meeting. "Please, sir," he said one more time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I please just call my mom?" Whitmore had already reached for his radio. "Security to the main lobby immediately. We have a situation that needs to be resolved." The boy felt tears starting to form in his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. His mother had always taught him to stay calm and dignified, even in difficult situations. But this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared in the lobby. They looked at the well-dressed, obviously upset child and then at their manager with some confusion. "Sir?" one of them asked. "What's the situation?" "This young man is trespassing," Whitmore said confidently. "He's been asked to leave multiple times and is refusing to cooperate. I need you to escort him from the premises." The security guards exchanged glances. The boy didn't look like any kind of threat, but they were being given direct orders by their supervisor. "Son," one of the guards said gently, "is there someone we can call for you?" "My mom," David said quickly. "She's right upstairs, room 847, please just let me call her." But Whitmore shook his head firmly. "No more delays. Remove him from the building now." As the security guards reluctantly approached the boy, more guests began pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The situation had clearly escalated beyond what anyone in the lobby felt was reasonable or appropriate. The 2 security guards stood on either side of David, their faces showing clear discomfort with the situation. Officer Martinez, the older of the 2, had been working hotel security for 8 years and had never been asked to remove a child who was simply sitting and reading. But orders were orders, and challenging the day manager could mean losing his job. "Come on, son," Officer Martinez said softly, placing a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "Let's make this easy for everyone." David looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Please, sir, I promise I'm telling the truth. My mom is just upstairs. Can't you just check with the front desk? They have her name in the computer." The younger security guard, Officer Chen, glanced toward the registration desk, but Whitmore immediately stepped forward. "I've already made my decision," the manager said firmly. "This situation has gone on long enough and it's disturbing our other guests." Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had spoken up earlier, moved closer to the group. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking with indignation. "That child has done nothing wrong. I've been watching him for over an hour, and he's been perfectly well behaved." "Ma'am, please step back," Whitmore replied curtly. "This doesn't concern you." But Mrs. Patterson wasn't backing down. "It concerns every decent person in this lobby. You're treating this boy like a criminal, when all he's done is sit quietly and read his schoolbook." Mr. Rodriguez continued recording with his phone, making sure to capture not just the confrontation but also the reactions of other guests. Several people had gathered around, and the mood in the lobby was clearly shifting against the manager's actions. "Are you seriously going to throw out a 12-year-old kid for sitting in a chair?" asked a young woman who had been working on her laptop near the windows. "What exactly is he supposed to have done wrong?" Whitmore's face was getting red with frustration. He wasn't used to having his authority questioned, especially not in front of so many people. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your concern, but I have a responsibility to maintain order and security in this establishment. This young man has no proof that he belongs here, and hotel policy requires that unaccompanied minors be supervised by registered guests." "But he told you his mother's room number," protested another guest. "Why don't you just call the room and check?" "Anyone can make up a room number," Whitmore replied, repeating his earlier argument. "I could say I'm staying in the presidential suite, but that doesn't make it true." David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to stay composed. "Sir, I can tell you other things about the hotel. We checked in yesterday afternoon. The lady at the front desk gave us 2 key cards. Our room has a view of the park, and there's a coffee maker that my mom used this morning. I can describe the hallway, the elevator bank, anything you want." Officer Martinez looked at the boy with growing sympathy. The kid's details were very specific, and his distress seemed genuine. "Boss," he said quietly to Whitmore, "maybe we should just make a quick call upstairs. It would only take a minute." "I've made my decision," Whitmore snapped. "Remove him from the building, now." The crowd of onlookers was growing larger, and several more people had started recording. A businessman near the elevator called out, "This is going to be all over social media in about 10 minutes. Are you sure this is how you want your hotel to be remembered?" Whitmore glanced around at all the phones pointed in his direction, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. He had committed to this course of action, and changing his mind would make him look weak and incompetent. "Officers, please do your job," he ordered. Officer Martinez sighed deeply and looked down at David. "Son, I'm really sorry about this, but I need you to come with us. We'll walk you to the exit." David's composure finally cracked, and tears started flowing down his cheeks. "I don't understand what I did wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "I was just waiting for my mom. I didn't bother anybody, I didn't make noise, I just sat here and read my book." The sight of the crying child being escorted by 2 large security guards created a wave of murmurs throughout the lobby. Several guests were shaking their heads in disgust, and Mrs. Patterson was openly arguing with other staff members who had appeared to watch the situation unfold. "This is shameful," she declared loudly. "Absolutely shameful. I've been coming to this hotel for 15 years and I've never seen anything like this." As they walked toward the exit, David tried one more time to reason with the guards. "Please, can I at least get my mom's business card from my backpack? It has her name and her law firm on it. That would prove I'm telling the truth." Officer Chen looked at Officer Martinez, who glanced back at Whitmore. The manager shook his head firmly. "No more delays, get him out of here." The lobby doors were heavy glass panels that required a badge to open from the inside. As Officer Martinez used his card to unlock the door, more guests gathered to watch the unprecedented scene. A group of lawyers who had been having coffee recognized the injustice of the situation and began discussing whether they should intervene. "This could be a civil rights violation," one of them said quietly to his colleague. "Removing a child from a public accommodation without cause, especially if there's any element of discrimination involved." David's backpack slipped from his shoulder as they reached the door, and his textbooks scattered across the marble floor. His science book fell open to the chapter on planets that he had been studying, and loose papers with his homework assignments fluttered around their feet. "My stuff," David said, trying to bend down to collect his belongings, but Officer Martinez gently prevented him. "I'll get it," the guard said, quickly gathering the boy's books and papers. As he picked up the items, he couldn't help but notice the child's name written on the homework assignments and the school's letterhead on some of the papers. Everything looked legitimate and normal, exactly what you'd expect from a regular student. The glass doors opened with a whoosh of cool air from outside. David had never felt more humiliated in his life. He could feel dozens of eyes watching him as he was escorted out of the building like some kind of troublemaker. "I'm really sorry, kid," Officer Martinez whispered as they stepped outside. "This doesn't feel right to any of us." On the sidewalk, David stood alone with his backpack watching the security guards return to the building. Through the glass doors he could see the lobby still buzzing with activity. People were talking animatedly, and several were still holding up their phones. The afternoon sun felt too bright after the subdued lighting of the hotel lobby. Cars drove by on the busy street, their drivers completely unaware of what had just happened. David found a bench across the street where he could still see the hotel entrance and sat down, hoping his mother would appear soon. His hands were still shaking as he pulled out his phone to call her, but he hesitated. He didn't want to interrupt her important meeting, but he also didn't know what else to do. He had never been in a situation like this before, and he felt completely alone and confused. Inside the hotel, Whitmore was trying to disperse the crowd and return the lobby to normal, but the damage was already done. Multiple videos of the incident were already being uploaded to social media platforms, and the story was beginning to spread far beyond the hotel's marble walls. Mrs. Patterson approached the front desk, demanding to speak with the general manager. "What just happened here was completely unacceptable," she told the clerk. "That child was a guest in this hotel and he was treated like a criminal. Someone needs to be held accountable for this." The young woman behind the desk looked nervous and overwhelmed. She had watched the entire incident unfold and agreed that it seemed wrong, but she didn't have the authority to override management decisions. "I can take a message for the general manager," she offered weakly. "You can do more than that," Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. "You can look up room 847 and see if there's a Dr. Johnson registered there. It would take you 30 seconds to verify what that poor child was telling you." The desk clerk glanced around nervously, then quickly typed the room number into her computer. Her face went pale as she read what appeared on the screen. "Oh no," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh no, no, no." Dr. Catherine Johnson closed her laptop and gathered her papers from the polished conference table. The meeting had run longer than expected, but it had been productive. She and her colleagues had been discussing upcoming civil rights cases that would likely reach the federal level, and her expertise was often sought after in these complex legal matters. As one of the youngest federal judges ever appointed, Dr. Johnson had built her reputation on fairness, thorough preparation, and an unwavering commitment to justice. She had worked her way up from a small-town public defender to sitting on the federal bench, and she never forgot the struggles that brought her to where she was today. "Catherine, thank you for your insights on the housing discrimination case," said Judge Williams, her longtime colleague. "Your perspective on the constitutional issues will be invaluable when this reaches the appellate level." "Always happy to help," she replied, shaking hands with the other attorneys and judges who had attended the meeting. "These cases are exactly why I went into law in the first place." As the group began to disperse, Dr. Johnson checked her phone. It was already 5:15, and she had told David she would be done by 4. She felt a pang of guilt for keeping him waiting so long. But 12-year-olds were generally patient, and he had brought his homework to keep busy. She took the elevator down to the mezzanine level and then walked toward the main lobby, expecting to see her son reading in one of the comfortable chairs where she had left him. But as she emerged into the grand space, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. The lobby was buzzing with unusual activity. Small groups of people stood around talking in hushed, animated voices. Several guests were still holding their phones, and there was tension in the air that hadn't been there when she went upstairs 2 hours earlier. Dr. Johnson looked around for David but didn't see him anywhere. She walked toward the seating area where she had left him, checking behind pillars and around corners, thinking maybe he had moved to a different spot. "Excuse me." she said to a woman sitting nearby. I'm looking for my son. He's 12. Wearing a school uniform. He was sitting right here waiting for me. The woman looked up with surprise and concern. Are you Dr. Johnson? Yes, I am. How did you know? Mrs. Patterson stood up immediately, her face flushed with anger and sympathy. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. Your son was just thrown out of this hotel by the manager. It was absolutely disgraceful. Dr. Johnson felt her heart skip a beat. I'm sorry, what did you say? That horrible man, the day manager, he forced your boy to leave. The child kept trying to explain that his mother was upstairs, that you were staying in room 847, but the manager wouldn't listen. He called security and had them escort your son right out the front door. The words hit Dr. Johnson like a physical blow. Her mind immediately went into both lawyer mode and protective mother mode simultaneously. When did this happen? About 20 minutes ago, Mrs. Patterson replied. I tried to intervene, we all did. Several guests spoke up for him. The boy was so polite and well-behaved, just sitting there reading his textbook. But that manager was determined to get rid of him no matter what anyone said. Dr. Johnson's hands were trembling slightly as she pulled out her phone to call David. He answered on the first ring. Mom? Oh, thank goodness. I'm across the street on the bench by the bus stop. I didn't know what to do. Stay right there, honey. I'm coming to get you right now, she said, her voice carefully controlled but her eyes blazing with fury. As she hung up, more guests approached her. Word had spread quickly through the lobby about who she was, and people wanted to make sure she knew what had happened. Dr. Johnson, said Mr. Rodriguez, still holding his phone. I recorded the whole thing. That manager was completely out of line. Your son handled himself with incredible grace under impossible circumstances. I'm a lawyer myself, added another man, and what I witnessed here today was unconscionable. That child was clearly telling the truth, and the manager refused to take even the simplest step to verify his story. A young woman approached hesitantly. I work for a news station, she said. I happened to be here for a different story, but I saw what happened. The video is already going viral on social media. People are outraged. Dr. Johnson listened to each person, her legal mind cataloging every detail while her mother's heart ached for what her son had endured. She had spent her entire career fighting against exactly this kind of treatment, and now it had happened to her own child. Where is this manager now? She asked. Mrs. Patterson pointed toward the front desk area. He's been trying to calm things down, but people are furious. Half the lobby saw what happened, and everyone knows he was wrong. Dr. Johnson walked quickly toward the front door, and several guests followed her, wanting to see the reunion and make sure David was okay. Through the glass doors, she could see her son sitting on the bench across the street, looking small and alone. The moment she stepped outside, David jumped up and ran to her. She wrapped him in her arms, and for a moment, the federal judge disappeared, and there was only a mother comforting her child. I'm so sorry, Mom, David said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I tried to tell them you were upstairs. I tried to explain everything, but he wouldn't listen. He said I was lying. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart, she said firmly. Nothing at all. You did everything right. I was scared, David admitted. I've never had anyone treat me like that before. I didn't understand why he was so angry with me. Dr. Johnson held him tighter, her mind already working through the legal implications of what had occurred. As a mother, she wanted to protect her son from ever experiencing this kind of treatment again. As a federal judge, she understood the broader issues at play and the opportunity this represented to create meaningful change. Come on, she said, taking his hand. We're going back inside. Do we have to? David asked nervously. Yes, we do, she replied gently but firmly. Because what happened to you was wrong, and wrong things need to be made right. As they walked back toward the hotel entrance, Dr. Johnson could see people inside the lobby, watching through the glass doors. Mrs. Patterson was still there, along with Mr. Rodriguez and several other guests who had witnessed the incident. The automatic doors opened and Dr. Johnson walked into the lobby with David beside her. The conversations that had been buzzing throughout the space gradually quieted as people realized she had returned. She walked directly to the front desk, where the young clerk who had discovered the truth about room 847 was still looking shaken and guilty. "Good evening," Dr. Johnson said calmly. "I'm Dr. Catherine Johnson, and this is my son, David. I understand there was some confusion earlier about whether we were guests in this hotel." The desk clerk's eyes widened with recognition and embarrassment. "Dr. Johnson, I am so incredibly sorry. I tried to tell Mr. Whitmore that you were registered in room 847, but he had already—" She trailed off, realizing how inadequate any explanation would sound. "Where is Mr. Whitmore now?" Dr. Johnson asked, her voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "He's in his office, but Dr. Johnson, please. I want you to know that most of us here thought what happened was completely wrong. We tried to speak up, but—" "I understand," Dr. Johnson replied. "And I appreciate that you and others attempted to intervene. But I need to speak with your manager immediately." Word was spreading quickly through the hotel staff that Dr. Catherine Johnson was in the lobby. Those who recognized her name knew her reputation as one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country before her appointment to the federal bench. Others were quickly being filled in by their colleagues about exactly who was standing at their front desk. The hotel's assistant manager, who had been in the back office during the earlier incident, hurried out to the front desk. His face was pale with the realization of what had occurred under his watch. "Dr. Johnson," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about what happened. I was not present during the incident, but I have been made aware of the situation, and it is absolutely unacceptable." "I appreciate your apology," Dr. Johnson replied, "but I need to speak with the person who made the decision to have my son removed from this hotel. I assume that would be Mr. Whitmore?" The assistant manager nodded reluctantly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll get him immediately." As they waited, more guests approached Dr. Johnson to express their support and to share what they had witnessed. The mood in the lobby had completely shifted from the earlier tension to a sense of anticipation and solidarity with the family who had been wronged. David stayed close to his mother's side, still processing what had happened but drawing strength from her calm, confident presence. He could see that she was angry, but it was a controlled anger, the kind that came from someone who knew exactly how to channel their emotions into effective action. Within minutes, Richard Whitmore emerged from the back office, his face showing a mixture of defiance and growing apprehension as he realized who was waiting for him in the lobby. Richard Whitmore walked into the lobby with his shoulders squared and his chin raised, still believing he had handled the situation correctly. In his mind, he had protected the hotel's reputation and maintained proper standards. He expected to find a typical angry parent that he could handle with a standard apology and maybe a small gesture like a free meal. What he found instead was a lobby full of guests, who all turned to look at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. The atmosphere was tense, and he could feel dozens of eyes following his every move as he approached the front desk. "I understand you wanted to speak with me," Whitmore said to Dr. Johnson, his tone still carrying the authoritative edge he was used to using with difficult customers. "I'm Richard Whitmore, the day manager here." Dr. Johnson looked at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. I'm Dr. Catherine Johnson, and this is my son, David. I believe you've already met." Whitmore glanced down at the boy, who stayed close to his mother's side. For a moment, something flickered across his face, perhaps a recognition that the child looked exactly as he had before, well-dressed and respectful, but he quickly pushed that thought aside. "Yes, well, there was a situation earlier," Whitmore said, his voice becoming slightly defensive. "We have policies here about unaccompanied minors, and when I couldn't verify that your son was actually a guest—" "You couldn't verify it?" Dr. Johnson interrupted quietly. "Or you chose not to verify it?" The question hung in the air. Whitmore felt a slight shift in his confidence as he noticed more people gathering around to listen. Hotel staff members had also appeared, standing at a respectful distance but clearly focused on every word of the conversation. "I asked your son for proof that he belonged here," Whitmore replied, "and he couldn't provide any." Mrs. Patterson, who had been standing nearby, couldn't contain herself. "That's not true. He told you his room number. He offered to call his mother. He even offered to show you her business card. You refused to let him do any of those things." Whitmore shot her an irritated look. "Ma'am, please let me handle this." "Conversation?" "No," Dr. Johnson said firmly. "Mrs. Patterson was a witness to what happened here, and her account is important. Please continue, Mrs. Patterson." The elderly woman stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "Your son was sitting quietly reading his textbook for over an hour. He was polite, well-behaved, and clearly telling the truth about staying here. This man," she pointed at Whitmore, "decided from the moment he saw that child that he didn't belong here, and he refused to listen to reason." Mr. Rodriguez held up his phone. "I have the entire incident recorded, Dr. Johnson. Your son asked multiple times to call you, and Mr. Whitmore refused. The boy gave specific details about your room, about checking in yesterday, even about the coffee maker. Any reasonable person would have taken 2 minutes to verify his story." Whitmore's face was beginning to redden. "Now wait just a minute. I was following hotel policy and using my best judgment to maintain security." "Your best judgment?" Dr. Johnson's voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. "Your best judgment was to have a 12-year-old child physically removed from this hotel without making a single attempt to verify his completely reasonable explanation? Anyone can make up a room number," Whitmore insisted, falling back on his earlier argument. "Room 847, Dr. Johnson said simply. "The Jefferson Suite. We checked in yesterday at 3:47 p.m. The front desk clerk was a young man named Kevin who helped us with our bags. We requested late checkout for today because of my conference schedule. Our room has a view of Central Park, and yes, there is indeed a coffee maker, which I used this morning to make coffee while David got ready for his day." The assistant manager, who had been listening to every word, quickly moved to a computer terminal and began typing. His face went pale as he confirmed every detail Dr. Johnson had mentioned. "All of that information is correct," he said quietly. "So, you could have verified David's story at any time by making a simple phone call or checking your computer system," Dr. Johnson continued, her gaze never leaving Whitmore's face. "Instead, you chose to humiliate and traumatize a child based on what exactly?" The lobby had become completely silent except for Dr. Johnson's voice. Even the usual background noise of the hotel seemed to have stopped as everyone focused on the confrontation unfolding before them. Whitmore opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Johnson wasn't finished. "Let me tell you who I am, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the marble space. "I am Dr. Katherine Johnson, United States Federal Judge for the Southern District. I have spent the last 20 years of my career fighting discrimination and ensuring that people are treated fairly under the law." A murmur ran through the crowd of onlookers. Some guests recognized her name immediately, while others were quickly, understanding the magnitude of the situation that had just unfolded. "Before my appointment to the federal bench," Dr. Johnson continued, "I was a civil rights attorney. I have handled hundreds of cases involving discrimination in public accommodations. I have sued hotels, restaurants, stores, and other businesses for exactly the kind of treatment my son received here today." Whitmore's face had gone from red to ashen. The full weight of his mistake was beginning to crash down on him like a tidal wave. "I have testified before Congress about civil rights violations," Dr. Johnson said. "I have been interviewed on national television about discrimination cases. I have written legal opinions that have been cited by the Supreme Court. And today, I watched my son experience the very injustice I have dedicated my life to fighting." The hotel's general manager, who had been urgently summoned from his office upstairs, arrived in the lobby just in time to hear Dr. Johnson's introduction. He stopped in his tracks, his face showing immediate recognition and horror at what had transpired in his hotel. "Dr. Johnson," he said, rushing forward, "I am James Mitchell, the general manager. I cannot begin to express how mortified I am by what has happened here today." Dr. Johnson acknowledged him with a nod but kept her focus on Whitmore, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I want you to look at my son and tell me exactly what made you so certain that he didn't belong in this hotel." David, who had been quietly standing beside his mother, looked up at the manager who had caused him so much distress. The boy's eyes were still red from crying, but he stood tall and dignified, just as his mother had taught him. Whitmore looked at the child and then back at Dr. Johnson, his mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. The truth was obvious to everyone in the lobby, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. I thought, hotel policy, he stammered. Hotel policy, Dr. Johnson repeated.
Show me the written policy that requires removing well-behaved children from your lobby without verification. Show me the training manual that instructs managers to ignore reasonable explanations and refuse to make simple phone calls. The general
Manager stepped forward, his face grave. Dr. Johnson, there is no such policy. What happened here today was completely contrary to our standards and training. Then what we witnessed today wasn't about policy at all, was it, Mr. Whitmore? Dr. Johnson asked. It was about assumptions. It was about looking at my son and deciding based on his appearance that he couldn't possibly belong in an upscale hotel like this one. Several guests in the crowd nodded in agreement. The truth of what had really motivated Whitmore's actions was becoming clear to everyone present. I don't... Whitmore tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He was trapped by his own actions and the undeniable reality of what had occurred. Let me be very clear about something, Dr. Johnson said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over federal courtrooms. What happened here today wasn't just poor customer service. It was a violation of my son's civil rights. It was discrimination based on race, and it caused real harm to a child who did nothing wrong. The lobby erupted in murmurs and whispers as guests processed the full implications of what they had witnessed. Phones were pulled out again, as people realized they had been present for a significant moment that would likely have far-reaching consequences. Whitmore finally found his voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. I made a mistake. Yes, you did, Dr. Johnson replied. You made a mistake that traumatized my son, violated federal law, and showed complete disregard for basic human dignity. And now, Mr. Whitmore, you're going to have to live with the consequences of that mistake. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Lincoln Middle School as Maya Rodriguez stepped out of her silver Honda Civic. She took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of her leather messenger bag over her shoulder. Today was the first day of her new job, and butterflies danced in her stomach like they had during her first karate tournament 15 years ago. Maya had dreamed of this moment for months. After spending 3 years teaching at a private school across town, she finally had the chance to work in a public school where she felt she could make a real difference. The students here came from tough neighborhoods, many facing challenges she understood all too well from her own childhood. She walked through the main entrance, her heels clicking against the polished linoleum floors. The hallways buzzed with energy. As students rushed to their lockers, teachers carried stacks of papers and janitors wheeled their carts between classrooms. The familiar smell of cafeteria breakfast and floor cleaner brought back memories of her own middle school days. Principal Johnson greeted her warmly in the main office. He was a kind man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes that spoke of years dealing with difficult situations. Welcome to Lincoln, Maya. We're really excited to have you join our team. Your references from your previous school were outstanding. Maya smiled genuinely. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to working with these kids. As they walked down the corridor toward her new classroom, Principal Johnson filled her in on the basics. Your 7th grade English classes are pretty standard size, about 25 students each. Most of these kids are good kids, but they've had some tough experiences. Some might test you at first, but once you earn their respect, they'll do anything for you. Maya nodded, understanding completely. She remembered being that age, full of attitude and uncertainty, not sure who to trust among the adults in her world. Her classroom was on the 2nd floor, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Maya spent the morning arranging desks, hanging up motivational posters, and organizing her supplies. She had chosen quotes about perseverance and inner strength, words that had guided her through her own difficult times. What Principal Johnson hadn't mentioned, and what Maya hadn't felt the need to share during her interview, was her 15-year journey in martial arts. She had started taking karate classes at 13 after a particularly rough day at school, where older kids had cornered her in the bathroom, making fun of her secondhand clothes and shy demeanor. Her mother, working 2 jobs to support them, both had somehow scraped together money for lessons at the local community center. The discipline and confidence that karate brought into her life changed everything. But Maya had learned early on not to broadcast her martial arts background. People often got the wrong idea, thinking she was aggressive or looking for fights. The truth was exactly the opposite. Her sensei had drilled into her that real strength came from avoiding conflicts, not starting them. By lunchtime, Maya had met most of her fellow teachers. They seemed genuinely welcoming, though she noticed a few exchanged knowing glances when they thought she wasn't looking. During lunch in the faculty room, Mrs. Peterson, a veteran teacher with 30 years of experience, pulled her aside. "Maya, I want to give you a heads up about something," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "There are 3 8th graders here who have been causing problems for teachers, especially new ones, Blake Thompson, Rico Martinez, and Kyle Adams. They're not in your classes, but they tend to target teachers they think they can intimidate." Maya's eyebrows raised with concern. "What kind of problems?" Mrs. Peterson sighed heavily. "Disrupting classes they're not even supposed to be in, following teachers to their cars, making inappropriate comments. They pushed Mrs. Williams to request a transfer last semester, and before that Mr. Davis left mid-year. The administration tries to handle it, but these kids are smart about staying just under the radar of serious consequences." Maya felt a familiar sensation in her stomach. Not butterflies this time, but the calm alertness she had learned to recognize from years of training. "Have they hurt anyone?" "Not physically, no, but they're intimidating, especially Blake. He's bigger than most high school kids and has a way of making people feel unsafe without actually crossing legal lines." Maya thanked Mrs. Peterson for the warning and went back to preparing for her afternoon classes. She made a mental note to be aware of her surroundings, but didn't let the information overshadow her excitement about meeting her students. Her first class that afternoon was everything she had hoped for. The students were initially skeptical, testing her with small disruptions and attitude, but Maya's genuine warmth and respect for them began to break down barriers. She shared a little about her own background, growing up in a similar neighborhood, facing similar challenges. By the end of the period, several students were actively participating in discussions about the short story they were reading. Her second class was equally encouraging. Maya found herself remembering why she had chosen teaching in the first place. These kids were smart, funny, and full of potential. They just needed someone who believed in them. It was during her planning period, while she was alone in her classroom grading papers, that she first encountered the 3 students Mrs. Peterson had warned her about. The door to her classroom suddenly swung open, and 3 large 8th graders walked in without permission. Blake Thompson was indeed imposing for a 14-year-old, standing nearly 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and an attitude that filled the room. Rico Martinez was smaller but carried himself with the cocky swagger of someone used to getting his way through intimidation. Kyle Adams seemed to be the follower of the group, hanging back but watching everything with calculating eyes. "You the new teacher?" Blake asked, not bothering with basic politeness. Maya looked up from her papers, maintaining eye contact but keeping her voice calm and professional. "I am. I'm Ms. Rodriguez. And you are?" "We're the welcoming committee," Rico said with a smirk that made it clear his intentions were anything but welcoming. Maya stood up slowly, her martial arts training automatically assessing the situation. 3 against 1, but they were kids, not adults. The classroom had multiple exit routes. Most importantly, they were just testing her, trying to establish dominance through intimidation. "Well, that's very thoughtful of you," Maya said with genuine pleasantness that seemed to confuse them. "But visiting hours are after school. Right now I have work to do, and I'm sure you have classes to attend." Blake stepped closer to her desk, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate her. "We heard you think you're tough coming from that fancy private school. Things work different here." Maya felt the familiar calm that came over her during sparring matches. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed but ready. "I don't think I'm tough at all," she said honestly. I think I'm prepared. There's a difference. The three boys exchanged glances, not quite sure how to interpret her response. Kyle spoke up for the first time. You better watch yourself, lady. Teachers who don't fit in here don't last long. I appreciate the advice, Maya replied evenly. Now I really do need to ask you to leave so I can finish preparing for my next class. For a moment, the tension in the room was thick. Blake seemed to be deciding whether to escalate the situation or retreat. Finally, he stepped back with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Come on, guys. We'll catch up with Ms. Rodriguez later. As they left, Maya sat back down, her hands perfectly steady, as she returned to her grading. But inside, she was already preparing herself for what she knew was coming. These boys weren't going to give up after one failed intimidation attempt. They would be back, and next time, they would be more aggressive. Maya had faced bullies before, both as a student and as a teacher, but she had never faced them while carrying a black belt and 15 years of discipline training. She hoped it wouldn't come to that, but if it did, she was ready.